This is the Dover Download Podcast. My name is Christopher Parker, and for the past 25 years, I've had the pleasure of working with, learning from, and talking to a variety of volunteer, staff, and community members. This podcast explores conversations, activities, and a variety of policies and programs which exist here in Dover to improve the community in one way or another. On the Dover Download Podcast, we like to talk about things that are topical, things that are impactful, and sometimes pull the curtain away and talk about operations and the behind-the-scenes elements. I think today we're going to do all of that by talking about a recent incident where we had a water main break, the exploration to find out where the break was, and how it was resolved. I'm joined by Fire Chief Perry Plummer and Community Services Director John Storr. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Doing well, Chris. Good to be with you.
Great, thank you.
So you're both here because this was both an emergency that needed to be managed. So Perry, as our emergency management director, gets involved. And John certainly is a water main break. It's your area of expertise. Personally, it's your area of expertise. I know your background is in water, but specifically here because Community Services oversees and manages and maintains the vast majority of infrastructure here we have in Dover. I think it's important to start off the conversation with, over the past maybe 2 or 3 years, we've seen a rise in water main breaks in general. And you've come on the podcast before, particularly during the capital improvements program, talking about the age of our infrastructure and how we're working to replace it and upgrade it. I've got to think that to the average person, and Perry, you said this offline, to the average person, you turn on the tap and you assume water just flows. Well, on Saturday, the 8th, it did not flow because we were in areas, turning it off as we tried to find the water break. In a nutshell, what happened?
Yeah, Chris, I'll try to give a recap pretty quickly here. But so Friday night, about 10:20 p.m., we have a computer system that monitors all the parameters in our water system. And one of the operators noticed a blip, if you will, a change in the conditions where we were having more water come out of the system than we were putting in. Normally in the wintertime, Dover's using less than 2 million gallons a day. So he saw a situation where more than 2 million was going out of the system. And keep in mind, this was late at night when people were probably in bed and the daily use was rather low. So we knew we had something. We suspected it was a break. So we called in personnel. We've never not found a break. We've never failed to repair a break. We figured it was just a matter of time that we would find it. So we called people in the first couple hours. We had 3 or 4 operators in. They couldn't find anything. They called me about 3 a.m. Still hadn't found anything. We figured as soon as the sun came up, somebody would report it. We started to get in the daylight hours and still nothing was popping up. So reached out to the city manager. He engaged the fire chief and the police chief to bring more resources to bear. And we kind of escalated it from just a utility function to a full-on activation of the city EOC, which is when Chief Plummer came in and brought his leadership to bear.
You thought that it would be more noticeable once morning came because it would be visibly noticeable, or because people would be showering and somewhere someone would say, oh, the pressure's low, or...
No, yeah, it's a good point, Chris. Given the magnitude of the break, we figured the instantaneous rate was about 2,000 gallons a minute. For the average person, what does 2,000 gallons a minute mean? That's about 3 million gallons a day. That's a huge, huge amount of water. That's not a trickle. That is a fountain. We just figured it had to be surfacing in a road somewhere. So as soon as people woke up, we had vehicles, people out traveling, people walking, something would become readily apparent. And then when nothing became readily apparent, we said we have a hidden issue here and we needed more human resources to start doing a more of a in-detailed investigation.
So the typical course is a water main break, which is 90% of the time going to be under a roadway or some sort of paved surface, because that's where we put our pipes, that the break would occur and water would seep up. That's essentially what happened on Kirkland Street.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, they're not like a Hollywood scene and it comes shooting up like Old Faithful, but the water always ends up surfacing, and we found it. You may recall we had a catastrophic break on Broadway this past summer that did blow a crater in the road. That is kind of rare to see something of that magnitude, but nothing was surfacing. Nothing was popping up apparent to the human eye. So our operators tried to look at some of the out-of-the-way locations, but did segue to more of a full-on activation of the city's emergency operations center because we needed more resources to methodically go through literally foot by foot of every water main segment that we had in the city, trying to do some sampling of outfalls where maybe the water from the leak was getting into the storm drainage system, and that's when we kicked it over, and Chief Plummer and his staff got involved.
So, Chief, the emergency management director role is part of your position here with the city. So you come in, as John says, and bring a larger scope to the operation. I'm thinking that it's not, to use John's terminology, it's not Hollywood. It's not a smoke-filled room with situation cameras everywhere and you're just directing people left and right. It's much more of a conversation and a directed action.
Once it turns from the norm to the abnormal incident, which either means you can't find it or it exceeds the resources, we bring resources together. Now, certainly some of the investments that were made in the city with GIS mapping, with computer modeling that actually, found it, monitoring, all those things paid off. So it did make it easier to run the incident. But at the end of the day, it takes people in a room, experts to figure out what's going on. And sometimes it takes resources out in the field. We had people, obviously, you can't thank John and his crew enough as far as, knowing the water system, knowing what to shut off, managing what valves to shut off so they could see if it was on that line or not that line. They did a fantastic job. But some of it was just eyeballs on the street, get fire trucks out there, get police officers out there, start riding the streets, start looking at vacant buildings, start riding neighborhoods, see if it was visible. So we had those resources. And so you had multiple resources come in and someone has to manage those multiple resources. Someone like myself can come in because of the training that we've had and basically just help be the conductor. Because you don't want the person, someone like Bill Belanger from the water department, his unbelievable knowledge of the water system, to have to worry about how do we get trucks out on the street to look? How do we get lunch for the people? How do we get the lab bottles out to the people that are getting labs? Because that would be a waste of his resource. So right person, right job. You put a structure in place. We call it an all hazard structure, which means it doesn't matter if it's a fire, if it's a police incident, it's an earthquake, it's a tornado or a water leak. You use the same structure and you start putting span of control in so the right person's in the right job, making the right decisions, and everybody can do their job simultaneously, which basically shortens the time from the crisis to the beginning of the crisis to the end. And that's what we did. And, certainly it's a testament to the city because, when you get in a room like that and start breaking everybody apart and saying, okay, you go do this, you go do that, you go do this, sometimes it's disagreements, sometimes there's not as much cooperation. You can't say enough about the city employees of how cooperative they are with each other, how cooperative they were during this incident, and how they came back off duty to try to mitigate this. So, it really worked out well, but some of the investments that were made in the city did make a difference. The GIS mapping, the knowing where all the valves were mapped and those types of things, the knowledge that the people had, the institutional knowledge that the water department had, all paid dividends. But really, it's about structure, everybody working together, bringing the resources together to work simultaneously so you can mitigate the incident.
You use the mapping, you use the GIS, the data we've collected to say, here is our system. And then you just develop a systematic means of whether it started the north end and go south, or whether it started the south and go north, or in reality, probably it started both ends. And then as you check and double check, John, what are you doing? You're going and you're isolating, you're shutting it down so that if there is water still flowing, that's the needle that's been in the haystack.
Yeah, exactly, Chris. We were trying to isolate from the outside, like north, south, east, west, and work towards the center of town. That's just how the valving works, because when you're out on the outskirts, it's easier to isolate certain sections. So that's what we're trying to do, is to isolate different portions. And we would get an area isolated, and then we'd have to check the production records, the computer monitoring, to see if we had stemmed the proverbial bleeding, if you will, to see if there was any impact. So we're working our way through methodically under Chief Plummer's guidance. I think, as I said before, we've never not found a leak, and it went from a point where we weren't finding it, and we needed somebody like Chief Plummer to come in to apply the incident command so we could methodically go through. It was really dotting your I's, crossing your T's, making sure we methodically left no stone unturned, if you will, and we were working our way through isolating all the portions of the system, and we're really coming to the end one way or the other. We're about an hour away from isolating where the leak was found, and one of Chief Plummer's staff people happened to stumble across the leak, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute. I remember in the command center, all kind of like a bated breath, just waiting. The room kind of went quiet, listening to the radio traffic, like, yep, I think we got it. And it was just big sigh of relief amongst all the team there that it was finally found.
One of the things that just kind of behind the scenes was the planning for the next step. because not only were we trying to mitigate the incident, we're saying if we can't mitigate it, what's the next step? What's worst case scenario? How many hours do we have before we have to do blackouts of water, or certainly start limiting water in some areas so places like the hospital can continue to operate. So you're planning cells doing that at the same time and working on the future planning. Hopefully you don't get there. Right. But, we had called the hospital, we had called the jail, we had called the nursing home and saying, look, what's your contingency plan if water starts becoming an issue? So we were hours and hours away from that, but we were planning for that next step. What's the next step? So we can always be prepared and make good decisions before it becomes a real crisis.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going next. I was going to say to John, I got to think that at a certain point you have to have, you go from all hands on deck because you want to find it to maybe 75% hands on deck because the other 25% needs to be doing exactly what the chief was just saying, okay, if then, so you need to pull people back, and maybe it's more the administrative or professional staff, not the people in the field that are used to being, but you have to have the city engineer per se being able to say, okay, if we needed to do X, where are we looking and how are we looking?
Yeah, and that was going on to Chief Plummer's point. I kind of was trying to explain it to my own family. It's like having a bathtub draining faster than you could fill it. Our water system being the bathtub, we were trying to stop the outflow draining out of the tub and put more in. As I mentioned earlier, the city collectively uses about 2 million a day. We were pumping as much as 5 million. So we're doing 2.5 times our normal production. And then, a critical partner in all this is the city of Somersworth. We have up on the north end near Willen Pond, we have an emergency interconnection. It's an emergency basis only. It's been in existence for 3 or 4 years, and although we exercise it, we've never had to actually use it in an emergency. So this is the first time that one community fed the other with bulk water, and we were going to take about 500,000 a day through that interconnection. So to Chief Plummer's point, we were trying to get as much water into the system, and we have 3 different water storage tanks, try to top off any that we could while we're still losing water collectively going out.
Before we get too far afield, I'm curious, is the weather and the temperature a factor? Is it just background, or does it truly impact you discovering the water source?
I think for us, the snow cover was problematic. There are frozen areas where the water could be running underneath. And I think, I don't think we've told the listener where the leak occurred, but it was getting into the Chico River. Had the ice surface not been there, I'm guessing that we might have detected it a little faster. But the snow cover, if the water was coming up on the surface of the ground somewhere, especially if out in a cross-country area away from a road, it was going to make it much harder to find visually. So the snow certainly didn't help. And then the snow and the cold weather on the emergency interconnection with Somersworth, it probably took us an extra hour to get that activated because we had to clear off valves that would be accessible in the ground. And so I think we've learned to get those flagged. We can probably activate that maybe a half hour, an hour shorter next time just to save a little bit of spare time.
I think one of the other things that was really interesting, some of the resources that we were bringing in, because that's part of the planning. Who can you bring in to help? And, it got somewhat creative. We started with obviously police fire going around, bringing them in. And then, Mike Gillis came in and brought a drone in. Okay, let's get it up in the air to try to get a bigger picture, more eyes in a bigger area. And then when we were talking about that, one of the SWAT team members said to me, hey, our drones have thermal imaging, so they can tell that they can detect the difference in temperature. Yep. So, so the water coming out of the ground is going to be warmer than so we'll be able to find it. And so that led us to say, okay, so we know the state police helicopter has thermal imager on their helicopter that can do a larger area. So we called and actually got the state police helicopter. So if people heard the helicopter flying over, it was actually not as much visual as it was thermal. They can detect a change in 4 degrees. So that water, as to John's point, if that water was flowing out in the field or flowing someplace and we didn't see it, they would have picked it up. Now, the way that it worked out, it was going in the river under the ice, so it didn't detect anything. But, you start looking at those. Then we brought in a couple of contractors based on John's recommendations to start listening for pipes for the flow being higher than normal, to try to look at those in areas that were more difficult to shut down. And then bring in some engineers to help us start looking at what that looks like, how much we are losing, and that might narrow it down to what size pipe it is. And if we figure out what size pipe it is, then we can narrow it down to where it might be. So, those things are all happening simultaneously. If you try to do them sequentially, we'd still be looking for that leak. Right. But you bring all those resources together and start managing and start getting all those ideas and, get a pretty diverse group. And that's why the incident becomes successful.
to John's point, where was the leak?
I'll let Chief Plummer break the suspense.
I've been doing this for, 35, 40 years, and any big incident always has the perfect storm.
Yeah.
In this case, it was a perfect storm. It was a vacant building. Okay, so that happens. Any other vacant building pushing out 2 million gallons of water would have been very visible. Even with a basement, it would have filled it up and pushed it out. This one overhangs the river at 432 Central Ave. So the water was going right out the floor into the river. I don't know if there's another building in the city that could happen to. So that was one. So we couldn't find it. It's a vacant building that normally has heat, and it appears that it froze and broke inside the building. So that's another complicated area. It was downtown, as John said. We're working our way to it. So it was like almost, it was normally the last place that you'd get to shutting off water because of the way the complexity of the water system. So it was the perfect storm, and it ended up being at 432 Central Ave, broken pipe inside, water goes into the river. River's not going to raise with 2 million gallons a minute, and so it was the perfect storm. We early on started thinking about vacant buildings, so we're sending people to them, but a downtown building would have been very visible if it wasn't overhanging the river. So we systematically went to that building by a process of elimination. It was pretty long into the event.
So you both have talked about the collaborative nature, and Chief, you've been here before and you've come back, and I think you still see it. That's, I think, one of the hallmarks of the manager's leadership is that we are all part of the same team. We all pull together, regardless of your title, regardless of your working hours. When there is something that needs to be addressed, we all grab a hold and address it. As we wrap up here, that leads me to a thought, and it's sort of tangential, but that is something that I think Mike Gillis and his team have put out in the Dover download and other areas of residents can be part of that solution too by A, watching and reporting as they have done in past on water main breaks, but B, digging out hydrants after it snows or catch basins when it snows. Having those resources, John, to your point, maybe it wouldn't have been such a factor because of the interconnect, the gates. Someone's not going to really be able to dig out a gate, but if you show up, Chief, and the fire hydrant needs to be dug out, that adds time to your response. Again, not this sort of incident, but an incident in general. And I really want to encourage people to partner in that and recognize if you have a hydrant near you, take the 10 minutes so that when your house needs it, it's available. And John, to the same point, if people have catch basins near them, I know the plows do a good job of when they scrape to get near them, but it doesn't hurt for someone to take a shovel down and clean that out as well. So along that same line of people helping with their hydrants and their catch basins, either one of you, I know we did get a lot of tips. We did get a lot of feedback. The media services had put out a couple different emails saying, if you see something, say something, and here's how to do that. That was working to some degree, right?
Yeah, it was. I was surprised with the number of responses. There are a lot of people that were providing good feedback. I kind of figure it's like a crime tip line almost. And Mike Gillis and his staff were sending me updates, and I would scroll through. 95% were verifying what we expected to see. They were isolating portions of the city and like, okay, good, we've got that shut down as we expected. So it was verifying all that. But we were looking for the one-off, like, hey, I see something in my backyard or something is not right that broke a pattern. So that's what we were looking for, was that broken pattern, something to kind of stand out. But we're really very appreciative of the feedback we got. I got a lot of good comments back, a lot of support, wishing us luck, and it meant a lot as we were trying to track it down because we know we had to do this for the city.
And I think the second stage of that is thanking them for their cooperation and their patience. I mean, when you're going through this, we're going through shutting water off in segments of the city, which we know is inconvenient, but necessary. And then I know that we put notices out about conserving water. And what that does, is that going to stop the leak? It's not. What it's going to do is give us more time to keep critical facilities open. Should it get to that point, we don't want to wait to the very end and shut everybody's water off. Say, everybody starts conserving. We're all in this together. And any incident, whether it be a hurricane, tornado, flood, broken pipe, or even a fire, we're all in this together. The community, the government, the neighbors, we're all in it together, and everything that we can do to help. But even just people not showering and or running the dishwasher and things like that might have gained an hour to make a decision before we had to shut off the hospital or something like that. It didn't get to that point, but we do really appreciate their cooperation in understanding and patience.
Well, beyond appreciating all the efforts you both put in and your crews put in on Saturday, appreciate you coming in today because we've all talked about the need to continue to review this. There's always opportunities to improve our responses and to learn from incidents. And I know we will continue to do that over the next month to 2 months. But I appreciate you taking time out of the initial investigation now to come and chat with us and the listener about this. It's a timely conversation. I'm glad we were able to have it. And I appreciate you both coming in today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Chris.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Enjoy the day. As we have for the past year, every month at the end of the month, we like to sit down with Aaron from Planning and Brian from Media Services to chat about what occurred in the previous month. Aaron and Brian, welcome.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Great to be here.
Aaron, why don't you start us off with the one planning board meeting that occurred in February?
Sure. Like you said, there was just the one. To start off with, there were a couple conditional use permits that were approved by planning board. This was related to a single-family home that's being proposed on Back Road. Previously, the CUPs had previously been endorsed by the Conservation Commission and then, of course, came before planning board and they approved them. They also heard presentations on accessory dwelling units and transfer of development rights. And after board discussion and resident feedback, the board decided to create a subcommittee to review transfer of development rights, potentially recommend amendments. They're looking currently for members of the public to participate in that process. So if anyone's interested in applying, they can do so. They can find the application online or do so at the city clerk's office. But they will be looking at applications before the next planning board meeting on March 11th, where the planning board chair will be designated who's part of that subcommittee.
Great. Brian, before we head back to Aaron to chat about what else happened in the land use world, what happened in the city council's realm?
Well, as listeners of the podcast are well aware, that the City Council's focus in February has been on the fiscal year 26 budget. The city manager gave a high-level overview of the proposed FY26 budget at the first meeting of the month. The following week, the City Council held its first budget workshop where it received departmental budget presentations from the school, executive, finance, and welfare departments. At the City Council's second meeting of the month, it held its public hearing on the education portion of the budget. And in March, this will continue having workshops, individual budget presentations, and a public hearing on all non-education portions of the budget at its March 12th meeting. The budget itself, associated documents, video recordings of the budget meetings and workshops are all posted to the Budget Revealed online resource, which can be found on the city's webpage. And of course, other than the public hearings, the public can speak during the public forum of any budget workshop. They can send emails to the council voicing their opinions on the proposed FY26 budget. The City Council held a special session on February 19th. This was to receive the Ethics Commission's report on its findings and recommendations regarding Caitlin Wilkie's ethics complaint against Councilor Fergus Cullen. Following the meeting, the council voted to accept the report and place it on file.
I think it's also worth noting that the council at the second meeting of the month approved the purchase of a new fire apparatus, something that we've needed for a while, a replacement for a pumper. What's interesting is over time, these pieces of equipment have become less and less available as fewer companies make the apparatus and lead times have increased. The city was able to find a demo unit to actually accelerate the purchase process. Aaron, anything else in the land use world?
So planning board only had one meeting, but Energy Commission was busy. They had 2 meetings in February. They had a special meeting at the beginning of the month where they reviewed community power rate changes. So if any residents would like to review or compare their rates, they can do so at communitypowernewhampshire.gov. At their regular meeting for the month, they approved the 2024 Energy Commission report, which will be published on the city website. And they talked about a couple projects. One of them was the institution of a no idling policy in the city. This is an official regulation citywide for city vehicles that employees have to turn off the vehicles if they are sitting for longer than 5 minutes. This is not just an emissions reduction measure, but also very cost-effective for the city moving forward. The zoning board met. They approved a variance in a commercial district to allow a single-family home and approved a special exception to allow an automotive service business in the commercial manufacturing district. And the Forest Management Subcommittee met. This is a subcommittee of the Conservation Commission, and they're talking about summer plans for street tree installation and ash tree replacement. So we'll be sharing a lot more about that moving forward. And finally, the Conservation Commission met and reviewed a conditional use permit related to wetland buffer impacts as part of the proposed automotive service business that I mentioned that went to ZBA. There was another project related to some conservation district impacts that they requested more information on, so we'll be hearing more about that at a later meeting.
Brian, any other updates, whether from the school board or any other board or committee?
The Kachiko Waterfront Development Advisory Committee met in February. And Chris, some news with Great Bay Rowing.
Yeah, Great Bay Rowing, which we had been discussing both a design process for the boathouse that it wanted to construct on the waterfront, as well as a lease for the land underneath the boathouse. That had been going on for a while. They came to the conclusion that it wasn't in their best interest at this time to pursue either one of those. So they came to the Waterfront Committee to let them know in person that this was the case. It really came down to their financial wherewithal and not wanting to overextend the entity, i.e. Great Bay Rowing. They want to be successful, and they were a little concerned about the costs for construction, et cetera. At the same meeting, staff alerted the committee that we have received news that some of the sheet piles for the steel bulkhead along the water are rotting. There is a certain lifespan for these pieces of infrastructure, and so we knew at some point this was going to happen. It's just a little bit accelerated, but it is something that's exposed to the elements. So we are in the process now of getting a better handle through our design engineers on what replacement options are and what timelines. At this point, we don't think there's going to be any significant delay or impact on the project, but it is something we are trying to gather information, and we'll go back to Quiddick about at a later date.
What is the bulkhead area?
The bulkhead is an artificial seawall that connects the natural shoreline along the Kachiko River, and it's was set up as part of the dredging process, and we maintained it, and the intent was to put a plaza on top of it, and we still are going to move forward with that plaza. The question just becomes, are we able to just replace the sheet piling in the existing condition, or is there an opportunity to carry the granite toe wall along the whole frontage and eliminate the metal? So to be much more aesthetically pleasing and really more in keeping with the design vision for the overall waterfront area and Nebby Park. Also, I think it's worth mentioning both TIF boards met this month, the waterfront TIF and the downtown TIF. Downtown TIF, as we have seen over the past couple of years, continues to be successful, and indications are that the pro forma, which was a debt analysis utilized in 2014 to establish the downtown TIF, it showed the debt service being paid off in 2035 based on the valuations of downtown, based on the activity and the vibrancy we've seen downtown, which continue to create incremental growth in the tax base. We should be able to pay that debt off in 2026 or 2027, which is, as you could tell, a 10-year, if not 12-year acceleration. At the same time, the waterfront TIF, which is really just getting underway, as we know, the development is under construction now. That TIF, there is some debt we are continuing to take on as we do the public infrastructure work, but we do have the plan in place through the development agreement to pay off that debt service through the tax valuation of the new construction. So both boards met and accepted the report given by Finance Director Dan Lynch, and the council should get those reports at its March meetings. And then finally, the Parking Commission met, and it decided to recommend to the City Council that the managed parking system with meters and kiosks be extended down 3rd Street from Chestnut Street to at least Grove Street to accommodate what we see as drift in the folks trying to maybe avoid paying for parking and as they push to the outskirts. And we're seeing a lot more economic activity in that area. And some of the businesses have requested that we maintain the customer parking and ensure that there is availability of parking So the parking commission heard those requests and forwarded that onto the city council, which again will be heard in the March meeting.
So yeah, the city council had their first reading of that ordinance at its February 26th meeting with, I think, a public hearing.
Right, referral to a public hearing in March
12th.
Yep. Anything else for the good of the order?
That's all I got.
I appreciate you both being here this month, and we'll see you in March.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for listening to the Dover Download this week. If you like what you heard, subscribe through your favorite podcast aggregator. And if you have something you want to hear a topic on, let us know. Finally, this is just one of the many ways we share information about the city of Dover. You can subscribe to the Dover Downloads email newsletter every week or other newsletters that we have by going to the City of Dover homepage, www.dover.nh.gov. Have a great week.